In New Zealand, we've faced a couple crises due to huge amounts of rainfall, and then 2 weeks later, a cyclone that hit the country, causing more flooding, damage, and multiple deaths. In times of a crisis, leaders have a critical role to play, and it's the time when employees look up to them for guidance, support, and direction. However, there are times when leaders sit back and let the situation unfold on its own, without actively engaging in the process. This lack of action can have disastrous consequences that can cause employees to feel neglected, helpless, and of course, directionless. In other words, they don't know where they're going. In this episode today, what I'm going to talk about is discuss the importance of actually leaders stepping forward and taking charge during a crisis. Let's discuss.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsas.
Hey listeners, welcome to the Ask Denis episode, which is a freestyle episode where I'm asked a question by our listeners or share my thoughts, experiences, and insights from working with many leaders around the globe. Hey listeners, we want to keep promoting the podcast, and thank you for those who are helping lift the visibility of this podcast. If we all keep promoting, we can go to number one in New Zealand, of course, but also maybe in other countries as well. If we all go to Apple Podcasts, and if that's where you're listening to this episode, find the Leadership is Changing podcast itself, then there's a plus sign in the top right-hand corner. If you click on that, it will then turn into a click. And I'll also ask you to leave a rating and a review. And it actually really helps with the actual visibility as well. If you're listening to this episode on Spotify, then know that you can put a rating, but you can't actually put a review at this stage. Once again, that'll help a lot with the visibility of the show. Now, leadership in times of crisis is not an easy task. It requires a strong sense of purpose, a clear vision, and the ability to make difficult decisions. Some of those decisions are so difficult, a lot of people don't want to make them. And that's why it takes when I'm talking about leadership, is not an easy task. Leaders who sit back and do nothing in a crisis, they risk losing the trust and respect of their employees, maybe even their customers and their stakeholders. The employees, they look to their leaders for direction, guidance, and reassurance. And when the leaders fail to provide it, they leave their employees feeling lost and unsupported. We as a nation in New Zealand saw that unfold in two major storms in the past couple of weeks. One in our major city called Auckland, where there's about 1.7 million people living in, and we saw the major storm in 1 hour, 2 hours, and a Friday night. We had so much rain, it was crazy. Normally, on a bad storm, it would actually be something around the likes of 76 millimeters over 24 hours. But over 24 hours, we actually had 240-ish millimeters of rain. Huge amount. And so it caused a lot of flooding, and it caused deaths, and it caused a lot of damage to property and so forth. We as leaders have globally seen this play out as well over the past 3 years, in particular with the global pandemic. You may be experiencing it today in your own organization that you work for or that you belong to. And I'm talking about not only for employees who may be working in a corporate or a small to medium-sized business, but it also could be working or happening in a community kind of organization where there are volunteers, not employees, they are volunteers. But this kind of thing may be happening. Sitting back and doing nothing as a leader, I think that's not good enough. The one thing that I know is that when leaders do not show up, the one with the title, then someone else is going to fill that void. They may not actually have the title. However, they are the real leader. During the pandemic and when we were going into lockdowns around the world, we saw leaders who were stunned. Leaders didn't know what to do. But then there were others who stepped up and they got on with things. They didn't have the title of that leader, but they actually were the leader of the future. What I'm going to do today in this episode is I'm actually going to walk you through various aspects that a leader should do to step forward and take charge in times of a crisis. One of the critical roles of a leader during a crisis is to set the course of action. They need to assess the situation and develop a plan that will help navigate through the crisis. This plan should be then communicated to the employees clearly and should provide a roadmap that people can follow. A good plan, well, it should be flexible, adaptable, and should take into consideration or into account the uncertainties that a crisis can bring. Okay, so one of them is the critical role of a leader is to set the course of action. Once that plan is in place, the leader then needs to step forward and take charge. They need to be visible, accessible, and approachable to their employees. I mean, even being available for them at any time. Sometimes they just want to talk. Sometimes they just want to be near you. Sometimes they just need to see you. The leaders then need to lead by example and show their employees that they are there to support them and guide them. This can involve everything from providing emotional support to working alongside their employees to making tough decisions when it's necessary. It's important for leaders to remember that they are not alone in the crisis. They have a team of employees who are willing to help them navigate through the crisis. The leader needs to harness the strengths and the abilities of their employees to achieve that common goal. This involves possibly delegating tasks, empowering employees to take ownership of their work, and create a sense of shared responsibility. You see, leaders, you don't have to be everything to everybody. You don't actually have to have all the answers. But if you're just there to show them and move forward, then that's great. Finally, what I wanted to say here is this, is that leaders need to know when to step back and get out of the way. Some of them overstay their welcome. They start to get in the way. In fact, they start becoming a nuisance or annoying. As the crisis unfolds, the leader's role must shift from active involvement to providing support and guidance from a distance. Remember to check in every now and then as well, right? Don't just abandon them and forget them. That's not what we're talking about. But allowing to provide that support and guidance from a distance and letting people get on with it. So that allows the employees to take ownership of their work and feel a sense of achievement as they overcome the challenges. Listeners, in conclusion here, what I wanted to say was that leaders who sit back in a crisis risk losing the trust and respect of their employees. Now, during a crisis, it's essential for those leaders to step forward, set the course of action, and take charge. They need to show their employees that they're there to lead and support, and that they have a plan to navigate through the crisis. As the crisis evolves, the leader's role may shift, but they must continue to provide support and guidance to their employees. You see, with the right leadership, employees can feel empowered, supported, and ready to face any challenges that come their way. All right, listeners, I've got a couple calls of action for you this week. One is for you to think about why leaders need to step forward and take charge in times of crisis and what you need to do to make that happen. The second one is an offer. It's an offer for you, or it's an offer for somebody you might know. And that is, are you a high-level executive or a senior leader feeling unfulfilled in your current role? Are you craving something more, but unsure of what that looks like or how you can make that leap? Well, I'm here to help you. Have you been made redundant and not sure where to start? Being made redundant is hard. It's a big shock for a lot of people. Would you like clarity on your next steps, and would you like to step forward with purpose and confidence? Well, I'm here to help you again. You see, with actionable coaching and a step-by-step approach, will help you gain the clarity and courage you need to make your next move. Whether you're looking to disrupt the status quo or simply find a greater purpose and fulfillment, our executive coaching will provide the tools and guidance to make that happen. Hey, if this sounds like you, then please feel free to reach out to me and let's get on a strategy call and let's discuss the needs or your needs and how I can help you make the leap. Hey listeners, well, that's it for this episode. It's always a pleasure being with you. Thanks for joining me on the Leadership is Changing podcast. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.